Hi guys, and welcome to this video analysis. It's been a while since I last posted any new content to this channel. On the one hand, I was very busy, but on the other hand, Onitama went through a fairly dark time. As some of you might know, I was one of the active players in the old Onitama app, but the app has now gone defunct. So they shut down the servers, they cancelled the app. And for a while we had no platform in which to continue playing. Luckily for us, Boardgame Arena started supporting Onitama roughly 2 months ago. And for our community, that was a godsend. Boardgame Arena has new functionalities that the app did not support. So we are able to spectate other players' games or our own games afterwards. We can review games. We also have more functionalities. There's a competitive mode called Arena. There are tournaments. And as such, what I ended up seeing is that many of the more active players in the old app, they transferred to Boardgame Arena. And the players who are doing very well in the app, they are still doing very well in Boardgame Arena. F. Henker is #1 currently. We have Suswarana in the top 3, top 5, myself also top 3, top 5. Onitama Königin also always in the top 5, top 10. Many of the good players in the app, they came to Boardgame Arena and they're still doing very well. I joined a couple of weeks ago, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago maybe, and one of the first features I saw when I joined was that they had tournaments. And this specific tournament, the Way of Onitama, really caught my eye because there were many players already registered to the tournament and many strong players. I believe the tournament has around 60 players in the end, and we see in the top 10, many of the top 10 players are participating in the tournament. So we can expect very high-level matches, very high-quality players. It will be a very, very tough tournament for sure, because there will not be any easy matches, so to say. Because of that, I decided to start covering the tournament. I want to analyze all the matches that I've played throughout the tournament. And if I see any interesting matches in each round, I also want to take some time and try to cover those and try to analyze those and see what we can learn from them. So this is my first round match. My opponent, CDShark, he has an ELO rating of 164 points at the moment. It's hard to say what this means. He could be a new player who is just starting, or he could be a former legend that just joined Boardgame Arena and still doesn't have many games in his repertoire. So it's very important, even if you see that your opponent is rated a bit below you, that you don't go easy on them and that you still try to play a sound game, an accurate game. So before we start the game, I always like to look at the cards and have a brief analysis to see what to expect. I see two main forces in the cards that were dealt in this game. One is the dragon. The dragon, as probably many of you know, in my opinion, is the worst card in the game, the weakest card in the game, because it doesn't help any structural play, any cohesive pawn structure. So I find the dragon one of the weakest cards in the game, even though many people seem to find it very strong. So the dragon is one of the forces in this game. It's going to allow maybe some sneak attacks, some jumpiness, some recovering from the edges straight to the center of the board. That's the type of movements that the dragon allows. On the other hand, the second main force I see in these cards is that there's both a rooster and a goose. Now, both of these cards, they promote a very positional, a very stable mid-game, end-game, because of the structural glue they have. They have both horizontal structural glue and diagonal structural glue. So these two cards, they let me expect that the mid-game will probably be won by strong and accurate positional play, whereas the dragon will maybe allow us to have some nice jumps to recover a position, or to try to control the center of the board even from afar. The cobra and the frog, they're nothing special. They don't really bring any major change on their own. So these are the two main axes that I see in this game. The dragon on the one hand allowing for some jumps, for some sudden control of the center, and the rooster and the goose allowing us to maintain a strong positional play, hopefully in the mid game, and then driving that towards the end game. Now, my first move in this game was to use the rooster to move my pawn to b2. Yeah, it's a typical move. I could have started with the goose. It's standard opening moves, nothing special. On his first move, CDShark decides to play with a cobra and to take the c4 square. Now, as you possibly know, I'm usually more of a fan of controlling the d or b squares first, because those are a bit more versatile. When you make a move towards the c square, it's a bit more committal. And indeed, what we see in this position is that by making this commitment of going to c4 immediately, our opponent now has some tough choices coming in the next few moves. On the one hand, the frog and the rooster, they guarantee the development of these pawns, or maybe of these pawns, but there will always be someone hanging. So either this pawn will be hanging in this type of position, or the e-pawn will be hanging in this type of position with no real good card to develop. For example, in this position, if this is what happens next, my opponent will most likely receive my goose or my dragon, of course, but the dragon is blocked here, and the goose will point out towards outside of the board. So this pawn, or in the alternative scenario, this pawn, might have a tough time developing because of this initial choice of moving the pawn to c4. That's something I will try to exploit if I get the chance. On my next move, I use the goose to control the d2 square with my pawn. Again, fairly standard opening procedures. I know at this point that if the opponent gives me the rooster, my opening will be solved. Cobra and rooster allow me these two moves. If the opponent gives me the frog, I will have to think a bit further how to continue this opening. Here in his second move, CDShark decided to use the rooster to get his d4 square. So we ran into exactly the problem that I pointed out earlier, that this pawn now has an easy development with either the goose or the frog, but this pawn will have to wait and see what happens. If I give him the cobra, then his opening is also solved, but let's see what I decide to do next. Here I have a few solid opening options. Controlling c2, controlling e2 with the cobra, both of these are solid options, probably the best options in this opening. Also, because I have the rooster coming next, I know that these two movements are guaranteed, whether I do this first and this second or vice versa. But here I decided to try to push a little bit further. This is the first round of the tournament. I haven't played as much Onitama lately as I used to play before, so I'm still trying to get back in the game, trying to feel a bit more what is right and what is wrong, what works and what doesn't. So here I played a bit more of a non-consensual move. I believe that this is not the best move in hindsight. I wanted to be aggressive, knowing that he has no clear line of attack on this pawn in c3, and as you know, controlling c3 is one of the pillars of the game. By moving this pawn, I'm also trying for this type of opening effect, where I have no weak pawns on the edge of the board, right? Because both a2 and e2 are empty. So this is what I was going for. I don't think it is the correct move, as in the most accurate move. The most accurate move would probably be to claim c2 immediately, or to go for e2, maybe that is a bit less accurate, but I think c2 would have been the, let's say, the more conventional move. But as I said, I wanted to play aggressive. I wanted to see if I could push for an advantage early on. I didn't see any immediate counterplay in c3, so I decided to push for c3 instead, with this idea that the dragon and the rooster will allow me to finish my development when it comes to that. Now, CDShark replies to that with possibly the best move in this position, which is simply continuing his development. The cobra guarantees that he will be able to finish his development later on. He decided to make this move with the goose and not with the frog. As you know, in the openings, I'm usually a fan of giving away the best card, because the sooner you give it away, the sooner it comes back to you. And he played using the same principle. So he used the goose, which is clearly the better card between the goose and the frog, probably in hopes that soon he will have the chance to use it again. So I think he played a very correct move here. In this position, there's not too much I can do. I could try to come this way to support the pawn, but I don't see a major advantage there, because then with his development he has 3 pieces looking at my pawn. I only have 2 defenders and I will never get a third defender on time. So because I don't see a healthy way to support this overextended pawn, I decide at this point to just take his d4 pawn using my rooster. Is it a good move? Well, it's okay. I don't think I'm in a better position here than he is. But I think trying to hold on to the pawn in c3 would have put me in a weaker position. So I would say that at this moment the game is pretty much even. Maybe a slight advantage for CDShark, because he didn't go for the crazy development like I did. He went for a more stable development. So this is indeed one of the good lessons, that a stable development is often the way to go, instead of trying to push it too much. Here CDShark has 2 options to take. He can either take with the frog, or he can take with the cobra. And he elected to take with the cobra. I guess that his reasoning was that by taking with the cobra, he still has this square vacant for his last pawn to be developed. And on the other hand, by taking with the cobra, he also holds both diagonals at the same time, which gives him a better look at the critical squares in the third file. I believe this is the correct move. Here I continue my development using the dragon as planned to do this jump movement, knowing that in the next turn I will probably want to develop my final pawn. And here is the moment when I think CDShark makes the first imprecision. I don't see it as a mistake per se, but I think it's an inaccuracy. I think moving towards the center is usually the preferred way to go, but instead CDShark opted to use the rooster to move to a4. I believe that his idea in doing so was to use the dragon at some point to jump to c3 and control c3 while being very well supported by both of these pawns. It's valid, but on the other hand, if he would have moved to c4, he would now be able to use the dragon to one of these types of moves. So I don't think he gains much by making this choice. And on the other hand, he's isolating his pawn. He's putting his pawn in a weaker spot. And this is something that I will try to pounce on if I get the chance. And I now finish my development with the cobra. There's nothing else I can really do at this point. I'm happy that there is this weakness here, so all my pawns are central, whereas CDShark already has one of his pawns on the edge of the board. So my hope is that at some point I'll be able to find a breakthrough in the center. but in this position there's nothing else that I can do than finishing my development as well. And here CDShark indeed pursues that control of the center that he was going for. So he immediately jumps to the center. He's very well supported both by the b4 and d4 pawns. So this is indeed the type of move that I was expecting him to play in this position. Another alternative would be maybe with the frog to get a more symmetrical type of development. Would this have been better or worse? I'm not sure. I don't really see a weakness in doing so. I think here it can get risky. What I mean with this is if both of these pawns come out of the board, he's definitely in a better position, but I'm not sure that that is what's going to happen, because I don't want to give him a better position. So I will try to find a better way to exploit his play instead. And I start doing so by using the rooster to move to e2. Now the reason for this move is twofold. On the one hand, I could have done a passing move with my master, but I don't really see a big advantage there. On the other hand, and most importantly, I've been given the dragon. And because I've been given the dragon, if I have the pawns here, the most I can reach with the dragon are these more central squares, but not c3. So I can reach b3, I can reach d3, but I don't have a direct attack on c3. And by using this rooster move, I now have my my dragon looking directly at c3, hoping at some point to be able to strike in that position, especially if I now manage to move my pawn from c2 to d3. Now all of my pieces will be converging in c3, and c3 will fall at some point. So this rooster move is precisely to prepare this pawn to start looking at c3 and hopefully soon get a breakthrough there. Here, CDShark decides to use the cobra to capture my pawn. And I will reply to that by capturing with the goose. So I think this trade did not really favor CDShark. On the one hand, before the trade, he had a better control of the board than I did. On the other hand, with this trade, he now lost his central piece. He activated my master, and my master is in a position that will be relatively hard to attack, because again we have this pawn looking at the center with the dragon. So my master, even though it's a little bit more exposed than his, it will be very hard to attack immediately. On the other hand, he lost the main piece he had controlling the center. So I don't think this exchange was the best move he could have made. And here, CDShark actually makes a very big mistake that will end up costing him the game, which is to try to threaten my master in c3. Now this mistake, this play would have been very good if this pawn was not here, or if I did not have the dragon. But having the dragon, I have two defenders on that position. I have my e2 pawn with the dragon and my master with the cobra, whereas he only has one defender defending his c3 pawn. So his pawn will fall, and this is immediately what I do. I immediately take the pawn with the dragon, and from here on the game unravels quite quickly. Here he makes a correct move, so instead of taking and allowing me to take, which would further his disadvantage, he plays soundly from a material point of view, which is if you're material down, you should avoid trades. And to avoid making the trade, instead he relocates his pawn with the rooster, making it harder for me to take it. But a 2-to-1 pawn majority is very dominant, especially when also the master is getting ready to control the center of the board. And because of that, I just keep pushing my advantage by using the Cobra to move from c2 to d3. I now have structural glue thanks to the rooster, so as I expected when I first analyzed the cards, the rooster helps me in this end game, keeping a very, very solid block that he will have a hard time going through. So by making this move, I know that it will be game over in a few moves. He still tries to defend a bit by moving his pawn to b4, but here I don't even have to take the pawn because I prefer instead to start pushing his master around and getting rid of some of his freedom. And to do that, I use my rooster to move to d4. So I have a kick on the king, on the master, with the frog or the goose, and he's really running out of good options here. He has this option, but then his master is completely surrounded by my two pawns, and he has the dragon option. But here, luckily I have the frog, which allows me to quickly regroup. And in doing so, this is actually mate in one. He can only flee backwards, but luckily I have my dragon looking at that square, so this is game over. So this was my first round game in the Way of Onitama tournament. I think it was a very good first round, very interesting first round. I think CDShark was playing very well until the point where he blundered the pawn. And then of course after blundering the pawn, it's game over quite quickly. But especially in this position, I think the game was developing in a very interesting way. I liked the guts he had, let's say, to use the dragon instead of the frog to jump onto c3. It's a very well supported position. And indeed, it doesn't really give me much counterplay. The best option I found in this point was really to try to activate my pawn with the dragon, but I didn't really see any further moves. So this was definitely a very interesting position, and I think up until this point the game was very well balanced. Unfortunately, after he blundered his pawn, then the game unraveled quickly, but I would like to congratulate CDShark on a good match, and yeah, and I hope his next rounds also go well in the tournament. I'll see you guys soon. Thank you.